You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hey, everybody. How are you doing out there? I hope you're having a great day, or maybe whether you're starting out or wrapping it up. Either way, happy to have you here, and thanks for your faithful follower role here with us today on Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I've got a gentleman who is a longtime advisor and coach to business leaders. He's a self-prescribed geek of business, and he is a Vistage chair, so we've got some of that we'll be talking about. His name is Jim Bramlett. Jim, welcome to the show.
Doug, thanks for having me. I love talking about leadership. I just appreciate you inviting me on your show.
Absolutely. I know you're a book author, and we'll get into that several times over. But it's a little bit of a tradition here, Jim. Give us kind of a backstory on your arc of how you got into this game and what it is that inspires you to do the work you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. Somewhere in my early years, I got the entrepreneur bug. And so over my career, I've started 7 different companies, 4 for myself, 3 for others, and they didn't all go well. You know, tuition is high. My first one I started in a senior in college, and the business was 100 miles away from where I was. I was naive and thought I could just hire a manager, and of course, naivety cost me. And so I learned a lot of lessons, though. But I spent most of my career in transportation and logistics industry. I enjoyed that because it's always something different every day. That's other than my very first company, all the companies that I founded were centered around transportation and logistics. And, I learned the hardest part of leadership isn't the strategy, isn't the plan. It's being able to deal with people. And, they don't teach a lot, other than the military academies. I like to say that, universities and colleges are focused on teaching you skills and disciplines. And at least when I went through, they didn't have much on how to inspire people and get them aligned and coaching them and the things that I believe are very, very important to successful leadership today.
Yeah, absolutely true. And on that note, I agree with you, and you and I share probably approximate same number of trips around the sun. And in our day, if you went to school, even if you went to pursue a business degree, there were some classes about managing, but there weren't any classes about leadership, and a little bit of organizational development and organizational discipline. But again, that was a little more strategy oriented than it was people skills. And I know with the universities I stay most closely connected to, they have in fact done a lot more in the leadership realm. They've built leadership centers. They've got curricula that addresses leadership development and bona fide skills. So kudos for that. And I certainly hope that that's representative of a great awakening of the need, to your point, of the critical need. And I think for any entrepreneur out there, whether you're new in the game or seasoned at the game, you will appreciate that you might be the smartest guy in the room in the technical side of what you're trying to build, but if you don't have something in the area, I like to think of it as the blend, the beautiful blend of art and science of leadership, and it becomes a real thing. So, Jim, talk to us a little bit about kind of the work you do with people now. I know I alluded to you're a Vistage chair, but just in talking with business founders and owners, what are some of the key things you typically start out with?
Well, I like to start out with my passion is helping leaders be successful. And then I turn it around when I talk to a leader. I say, well, what does that look like for you? What's your dream? What's your vision of being a successful leader? And try and identify then the gaps that they see in their own development. I preach that, the professional golfers, the best golfers in the world, have coaches and teams to support them. They haven't figured it's a game that you're never going to be perfect at. But being vulnerable and understanding that I got to continue to develop myself as a leader is paramount to, realizing my dream. That's what I find the most often. And one of the things, and I know you know this, Doug, but I think one of the challenges leaders have today is they're having to lead, 6 different generations who think differently. And because you and I have been around the sun about the same number of times, I joke with them. I say, listen, I grew up, I'm a boomer. I grew up in the carrot and stick era, but I don't remember the carrot. I do remember the stick because that's just how it was. But now, the younger generation, they want purpose, right? They want work-life balance, and you got to know how to manage those different generations. So I think as a leader, it's hard. It can be really hard.
It can be, and you're spot on, and inevitably, almost every client I engage with, it doesn't take long for that generational variance to come up as a point of concern that they've got. I historically have taken a little bit of a contrarian view on that subject, that I think blaming the disconnect on each demographic is an easy excuse, and I challenge leaders to simply look at each one of the individuals on their team as just that, an individual, and spend the time, invest the time to learn what makes them tick. How do they look at the world, and let them explain it to you in their own terms, and be willing to embrace it. And yes, you still have the right and obligation to explain the expectation that you've got for what their role is intended to do at the company, but you can shape and fit that role appropriately, just by having that meaningful discussion with the individual.
Absolutely. We had a speaker come in a few years ago, and he made an incredibly enlightening statement. He said, in today's environment, you as a leader, if you bring in a new employee, chances are they're not probably coming for the duration, say 40 years. It's a different environment today. And so you as a leader, part of your role is to figure out, maybe how long, they plan to be there. And the way to do that is have a one-on-one and ask them what their dream is. And when you get into that level, now you're on a personal level. You're not just a machine. You're not punching. I care about you. And in turn, you as the employee, I hope you care about me, the leader, and the organization. And when you get to that level, you can discover a lot. And of course, anything you as a leader can do to help them fulfill that dream, the more allegiance and the better they're going to be aligned with your mission and your vision. So, and I really love that. Getting on a personal level, I think, is very important. Like you said, you don't count these people as units or machines. They're all people, and we have lives that we have to live. And the better you as a leader understand that, I think the better you can coach and manage people.
Well, and I think what's vitally important, and part of what I'm getting ready to say is a page out of the EOS playbook, but it's the idea, if you're running a small business, every box on your org chart needs to be defined first by value contribution to the business. And if you've got a slot on your payroll that you yourself don't know the value proposition of that role in your company, you got some work to do. And if you've got an employee sitting in that slot and you're frustrated, you say, I'm not getting what I want out of them. Well, what do you want? You haven't defined it. You haven't really explained it. I've got another colleague. I did a show with her recently, and she specializes in, she calls it Activate HR, and it's a process that she's got to take each job description and really have a meaningful breakdown of it and say, well, you got these line items on the job description. What percentage of the day do each one of them need to account for? But more importantly, for each one of them, there's also a corresponding value contribution that is going to the company. And you may have a role where you look at the job description and you say, well, this item, you ought to take 2 hours every day to do this. And you go, okay, fine. Well, what's that going to do for the company? Well, that's 40% of our business. Wait a minute, time out. You're starting to see a disconnect there. You've loaded this person up with other things, and yet this one little sliver is going to be 40% of your business. You got some alignment work to do there.
Yeah, one of the things I obviously encourage leaders to do is make sure you can communicate and verbalize your purpose as a company. Okay, and then how do you align each employee to that purpose? They've got to, if they understand their purpose. I agree with there's a job in the job description, but your role is a component to helping us achieve our overall purpose. And I think when you can get down to individual purpose, it becomes, much more meaningful for anyone.
Well, part of that goes to the same notion of helping an employee understand the why they're there.
Yep.
This is your why. And I tell a classic story of my early days in banking. I took over a small department. I think I had maybe 15 employees or something. And I did the classic onboarding transition deal. I budgeted some time to go around to each employee's desk and sit with them for a while and talk about what they were doing. And the classic example I always like to talk about, I had this one lady, sweet lady, been at the bank a while. And I said, so what do you do today? And she says, well, I take this form out of this drawer and I go to the computer and I do da 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 da. And I said, oh, okay. Well, what do you do with it at the end? Well, I put it in this drawer. She went to the other side to start on the right drawer, end on the left drawer. I said, okay, well, I'm curious. Who brings those forms to put in the right-hand drawer? And she goes, oh, Miss So-and-so from such and such department. And I said, do you know what she does? No, I don't know that. Okay, well, where do the forms in your left-hand drawer go at the end of the day? Well, somebody else comes and picks them up and takes them. And I'm going, do you know that person? No, don't know. So I took it upon myself to go look up these couriers that were running these things and then talk to their department managers. And lo and behold, what we accounted for was this step in the wheel of the engine was to take basically brand new customer information and get it activated in our system. And then the form going out the door was going to permanent record for that particular customer. So I came back to this lady and I explained all that to her. And I said, do you understand how important your job is? Because the people that put it in your right-hand drawer, they're just collecting it down in the lobby. They don't know anything else past that. But you're the pivot. You're the one that's getting this customer activated. And she just lit up. She goes, I never knew that. I never understood that. And she just started, and not that she was bad by any account prior. It was just, I could sense that she was just doing her thing, clocking her time and, clocking in, clocking out. But now she felt important that it was something meaningful happening for the customers of the bank. And she took pride in that. And, it was a simple little help her understand the why.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. I think that's really important for engagement, emotionally, attaching yourself to an organization. I was told a story of this company in Minnesota that manufactured heart valves and pretty much a production line. You punch in, you put the widget. And what the company ultimately did, they had an event, and they brought in a bunch of patients who had received those heart valves, and they got to meet the employees and vice versa. And they said it made such an impact. Now these production line workers putting these widgets together saw, here's what's happening with that product. And they said the morale went up, the engagement went up, because they saw their purpose and their why. And we're helping save lives. It's not just about, getting so many heart valves through the line an hour, et cetera. So, yeah, it's amazing what can happen when you dig down with people and explain the entire process, what we're all about, how we're helping, we're solving problems, and you're a part of that.
Well, you just spoke a magic word that is near and dear to my heart: engagement, employee engagement. Let's talk about that a little more. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges in an employer leader being able to boost engagement? Where does all that start in your mind?
I think it starts at the top. And to me, it's all about communication. I don't believe people are really motivated by money. I think they're motivated by, being informed, making a contribution, making an impact. And that's what helps drive engagement. But if you have to constantly, as a leader, be communicating. Here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing. Here's why this is important. Here's where we're going. Here's how we're going to get there. Who's going to be involved. We had a speaker on this topic and shared an example where the CEO every month wrote a letter. And the first thing they did was recognize high contributors, but here's what's going on with the business. And it's just communicating. Because I don't think leaders communicate enough. I don't think you can over communicate. And I've been told, and I don't do the study, but you probably do, but I've been told that over half of employees leave their job because of their leader, their supervisor. It's not the company. And largely because they're not communicated well with. They don't know exactly what they need to be doing and what their purpose is and what their why. So I just think this whole communication, getting people aligned, helps get people engaged, where if you're just quiet, they kind of get lost in themselves and they don't see the purpose, right?
Right. No, I agree with you, and you're right that stat you're talking about is an age-old axiom in HR that, you talk to an HR person that's been around the block more than once, they'll tell you, the old phrase, people join companies and quit bosses. And and that's systemically recognized everywhere. And in fact, I tell the story. I had a colleague and old longtime friend who was an HR professional, and he, after many years of fighting the battle, he said to his senior leadership, we need to repurpose HR. We need to fix our managers. If we can do more with our managers, now this is a larger, global brand. He said, if we can do more with our managers, we won't have people problems. and they actually gave him a project. There was a major contract that the company had won, and they said, tell you what, we're going to make you the number 2 HR guy, not the number 1, but number 2, with the understanding you're kind of going to be the project lead. You're going to implement everything you've been talking about, and we're going to monitor and study and gauge and yada, yada. So they did that for 2 years, and sure enough, the employee retention rate went up, the engagement went up, the general pulse responses they were getting from employees was better, employee satisfaction was higher, et cetera, et cetera. And managers, interestingly, one of the side benefits that surprised even him, managers felt less oppressed. by being equipped to properly do more and see their people emerge from it. And so it was a flywheel effect that was really interesting. So it can be
Well,
done.
and I'm perplexed because I read now that the trend is we're going to cut middle
Middle
management.
management. That's right.
And I'm going, I personally don't say, well, how's that going to impact engagement? If you now have workers who can't engage their boss because now they've got twice the number of people they're responsible for, but at the same time, how many companies are investing in their managers and leaders and training them and fostering, nurturing their ability to be better leaders? I know in my early career I had I had bad experiences with bosses, and I decided at a pretty early age, yeah, it's important about the company, but I'm not going to just go work for anybody. I want to know who my supervisor is, and if I don't have chemistry there and I can't get along, I'm not even going to go down that trail. I will decline an offer. Don't want to go to work there because I think it is important about the boss, and I do want direction, and I want them to understand who I am, what my weaknesses are, coach me. I want to develop and grow. So if my leader isn't helping me develop and grow, what's the point?
Yeah. On that point, eliminating the middle management, I had a client company last year I was working with, and the founder announced one day he had this brilliant idea that in his, off hours, weekends, and nights, he's been exploring AI, and he's figured out how he can eliminate all middle management by implementing AI. And I kind of went, okay, well, tell me more about that. And he was proud of it. He thought, this is going to be great. And this is so. It's interesting. I took his script that he had built for doing this, the sort of the master playbook, and I fed it to my own AI engine. And I said, "What do you think about this?" And interesting, AI came back with the answer, "Oh, I would be careful. There's a lot of pitfalls in eliminating all of your middle managers." And it talked about development of people, just the frontline people, how you're going to develop them to be their best selves and produce the best work for you. If you don't have somebody monitoring them real time, human in the loop, interaction. And while all this was going on, I've got 5 kids that are all adults now, and we happened to be having a family dinner, and I brought this up. I said, "Hey, I've got this company that the founder thinks he can eliminate all the middle managers." And I explained it, and they all, in unison, they said, "No, we would never work at a place like that." And I said, "Okay, great. Why?" And they started talking about, we value the opportunity to be mentored, coached, and developed by the line above us. And if there is no line above us, what are we really going to do? We don't want to be just production spigots. We want to have our own sense of accomplishment and growth for our career, and we're not going to learn that from anybody else except somebody above us that's been doing it more and longer. And if you eliminate that, we're out. We're not going there. I thought,
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
I agree. I remember one of the larger companies I started, I'd raised some venture capital and had a good number of employees. And I remember telling them, the biggest compliment you can pay me is to learn and then be excited about going and starting your own business. That you've learned enough here and gotten excited enough that you can go do this yourself. And I did have a couple who actually went and did that, and I applauded them. And I said, "We're going to miss you, but I'm glad you want to take that risk and you feel like you've learned enough here, to make a go of that." And I just, and you may know, I don't know, how many companies are out there who budget for leadership, professional development to bring people along. Because, yeah, maybe some people are very happy. I just want to go, punch the clock and do my thing. But many of us want to learn, grow, and take the next step, and contribute in other ways. But you got to develop them, and you got to have leaders who know how to develop people, and that takes training. It's just not going to happen.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that whether it's a line item in the budget or not is obviously dependent on the size of the company and how the company's structured and where it's going. But even for those that are big enough to have a respectable line item there, what ends up inevitably happening when times get tough, people go into cost cutting mode, and that's one of the first things that goes.
Yep.
Because there's no immediate return. It's a long play. And so there's no immediate return. And when cash gets tight, they have to, cut and slash somewhere. But what I argue to folks when I hear that is that, okay, if that is in your downsized playbook, fine. But how about building a culture that is more oriented to that development so that it's not so much a line item need to send somebody to a workshop or send somebody to a class or even hire them a coach for a season, but rather it's organically done naturally by the leaders up and down the chain. And you have a discipline about bringing people in and having either formal or informal mentoring arrangements, et cetera, and, make that an expectation of everybody's job. You got to develop the people below you. I did some coaching for one of the large global brands in aviation recently, and I was already talking to some fairly senior leaders, and the goal was for them to build a very specific personal development plan to be reviewed by the senior leader above them, which is kind of some of these big companies call them L2s and L3s in the leadership chain. And first meeting we had with the L2, my guy presented his plan, and the L2 said, "You don't have anything in here about developing other people." And he said, "Well, that's a given where we are." And I thought my assignment was me personally mapping out the course I want to take. And the L2 said, "Yeah, but that needs to include developing other people." That needs to be part of that
Yeah.
equation. And I thought, okay, that's very interesting. And that's where you go back to your comment about lead from the top, being able to build the culture and build the climate. And to have that described that way. And then interestingly, a week or so later, I had another leader I was working with who reported to this same L2. And I was challenged by the conundrum. I had this intelligence now about how this L2 thought about things. And I looked at my second guy's plan, and he didn't have anything about developing people. And I thought, do I tell him or do I just let this play out? I opted to play it out. And so we went in for the L2 meeting, and he presented his thing. And sure enough, the L2 said, "You don't have anything about developing other people." And he looked at me and he said, "You knew this. Why didn't you tell him?" I said, "Because it's a cultural value, and I wanted you guys to have that exchange."
Yeah.
And he thought about it a minute and he said, "Okay, I really get that. I'm glad you did it that way."
Yeah, I do think it's part of the culture. Absolutely.
So interesting stuff. Well, Jim, now that we kind of dipped our toe in the culture water, talk to us a little bit about some of your observations and takes on how a leader helps create the right kind of culture at their business.
Well, I believe culture is intentional, and I believe that the culture, it's got to be the culture, in my opinion, it's the culture that the leader wants to instill. And it's all about values and beliefs that translate to behaviors. So the leader says, this is the organization and these are the behaviors I want to endorse and accept, and then write them out. I'm a big fan of David Friedman and his culture theories, but they've got to be well defined. It's not one word or just a little phrase. It's here's the behaviors that we endorse and accept. It's how we treat ourselves, how we treat customers, vendors, how we behave. And then you have to set a ritual. Once you define them, you set a ritual so that everyone in the organization every week is discussing the same ritual throughout the organization. And then once you get done, say you have 30 of them, you rinse and repeat it all over again. And that's how it becomes part of your fabric. But when it's written out, it's intentional, and everybody's involved. I think that's how it really plays out and becomes reality. And it makes managing and leading so much easier if everybody understands what the acceptable behaviors are.
Yeah. On that note, I experienced an interesting paradox a while back. I was doing some coaching at two different pretty large companies, and in one case, we got to talking about the culture, and my person kind of held up his security badge and flipped it over, and he said, "We have our cultural values written out on the back of our badges here." And I said, "Okay, that's nice. What does that really mean to you?" And he said, "Oh, we live by this. When we're encouraged, if we're facing a challenge, if you have to, if you don't already know it, flip over your badge, read through the list, filter your decision through these values, and see what you come up with." And he said it's enforced every time we go into a meeting. People are asking the question. And as an example, this was a quasi-manufacturing deal where people could be at risk out on the shop floor, and there could be bodily, damage if something went wrong. And number one on the values list was safety for our people. And to give you an extreme example of how that was applied, the company had negotiated the liquidation of one of their facilities. It was going to be sold off to somebody else. But it wasn't going to happen for like 18 months. It was already agreed, negotiated, et cetera, but closing wasn't going to happen. But they had rocked along and discovered there was a serious safety defect that had emerged. Some equipment had broken and potentially causing safety issues. They huddled up. What are we going to do about this? Well, a lot of businesses would say, we're selling this damn facility in 18 months. Let's don't spend any money doing anything. Let's just caution everybody and let's work around this, blah, blah, blah. But this company said, no, our value is we protect our people today. And they got into the details. It was going to cost them $400,000 to fix this thing. And they said, doesn't matter. It would be a violation of our own value to ignore it. We got to do it. So they did.
Wow.
Well,
Wow.
then in parallel with all that, I had another company, and discussion came up about culture. And coincidentally, the guy said, "Oh, we've got it written out on our badge here." And I said, "Okay, and that's interesting. So how does that work?" He said, "Not at all." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "That's my biggest frustration working here. We don't live by any of these values." He said, "They send them to us, they put them on the wall, they put it in memos from the CEO, but when we make decisions, we're all over the board. We're not anywhere close to true to any of these." And I thought, okay, there you go.
Yep. I do believe that you have to have a ritual that perpetuates it, explains it. That's the ones who live it. And I love that. I talk to a lot of leaders who believe culture's about beer Fridays or bring your dog to work day, or it's a perk. It's not necessarily a value or behavior. That's how they interpret culture, and that it's a perk. Culture is about your values, your beliefs, and how you act. And
I agree. And when I'm working with clients and they start asking questions about culture, I said, culture is not as hard to figure out as you think it might be. It is simply the question, how do we want to do things?
Right.
How do we want to treat people? How do we want to respond to customers? How do we want to engage with each other? That's the question. That's our culture.
Yeah, and a big part, and I hear this a lot, is you want to have accountability in your culture, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have challenges with accountability throughout their organization, and so being part of that culture, that should be a value, in my opinion.
Totally agree. Well, Jim, before you sign off here, let's talk about your books. Tell people a little bit about what you've done in the book writing world.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I wrote two books. The first one was about 5 years ago called The Unconventional Thinking of Dominant Companies. And the question in my head was, how did Amazon become the juggernaut they became and just really blew past Walmart? How did Netflix put Blockbuster out of business? And how did Uber decimate the cab industry? And so I wrote about that, and I believe there's a formula. They don't advertise it. They may not even realize it, but there's a formula that they really understand buyer psychology and what every buyer is looking for. And so I decided to write a second book called Stop the Hassle, where I apply it to every business. And it's a formula like this. It goes, well, what are we buyers looking for? And by the way, we're all buyers, maybe not professional buyers, but we buy things every day. Well, what drives us to make that decision of what we buy and from whom? And most of our minor purchases are very innate. It just happens. But we're programmed that we're looking for convenience. We want to save time. We want to save effort. We want simpler and easier. We're not looking for more complicated things. We want a competitive price. More importantly, in my opinion, we want pricing transparency. I want to know before I make that purchase exactly what I'm spending. I don't like fine print, surcharges, surprises, like the airlines and maybe hospitals and doctor visits. We want to know what we're spending up front. The third is we want a great user experience. I want to be treated as if I'm their only customer, even though I know they have hundreds, thousands, or millions. I want a quick response to an answer. And I want the seller to live to whatever commitment they make to me, either through their brand promise or, hey, I'm buying a washer dryer and they say they're going to deliver it Tuesday morning. Great. Well, that's part of the experience. If it's a retail, part of the experience is well-stocked shelves, lit, clean, well-staffed, bathrooms clean, if I feel safe. That all contributes to a great experience. And the fourth is trust. Can I trust they're going to deliver? I have a perception of what I'm getting. Are they going to deliver? So do they have warranties, guarantees? Do they have testimonials? How long they've been in business? Have they won awards? Are they specializing in something? That helps me build trust. Well, when I get all four of those, when I get convenience, competitive, transparent pricing, great user experience, and trust, I really don't have an excuse not to buy from you. But the fact is, most companies have some kind of conscious trade-off. They're going to trade off price for convenience. I'm going to charge you more because I'm going to get you through here quickly. Or they trade off price for experience, both ways. Well, yeah, we have dirty floors and it's not well stocked, and because we sell at a cheap price. Nordstrom's, we're going to get great merchandise, beautiful stores, personal shop, but we're going to charge you a lot of money for that. I got an excuse. So I'm always finding ways to have an excuse. So it's very hard to accomplish. But I'm a firm believer in people, process, and product. But start with the product. If you got the right product, then make sure you have the right people and the right processes. And so the second book was formulaic in explaining this, how you can look at your product and then compare yourself to your competitors. There's no national standard on being convenient. Be more convenient than your competitor. Give a better experience than your competitor. Price competitively, but transparently. And then assure them that they're going to be satisfied, they're going to get with. And when you do that against your competitors, you'll win. And then the second half of the book is more cultural in that I'm a believer every company should have a research and development function. Research your competitors because things change all the time. They're making improvements. You should be as well. I'm a big believer in a customer-centric culture, and at least having culture, like we talked about. So that's what the second book is about. It's all about helping companies grow. So part of what I spend my time in is having people understand the importance of product and meeting what we buyers are looking for. So that's growth. The other part of my passion is the growth of leaders. And, what's your product? Are you inspiring others? Are you able to engage people? Are you communicating well? All of those facets. So that's what I'm all about.
That's awesome. Well, on that note, tell people the best way to get a hold of you, Jim, if they're interested in knowing more.
Yep, I have. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me, Jim Bramlett, on LinkedIn. I have a website, jimbramlett.com, a second website called Strategies to Grow. And please reach out. I love helping people. That's why I'm a Vistage chair.
All right. Well, as always, folks, we're going to have those links in the show notes and even some tags for the books there that Jim mentioned. So hop down there and check that information out. But one last time, Jim, thanks for sitting in. This has been great.
Doug, thank you for what you do. I think leadership is hard, and the more help you can extend to wannabe entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneurs, the better they are going to be able to be successful. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for having me.
I appreciate that. You're very welcome and happy to do it. And on that note, I do want to remind you, if you want to get a hold of me, you can go to my website at dougthorpe.com. A lot of information there, some free resources and some surveys, assessments, and that sort of thing that you can take into your consideration for your growth and development as a leader. I also want to remind you, we have a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the archives, and we got a lot of information, a lot of great guests, just like Jim here, and check out what they've got to say and share. But with that, I think we're going to wrap it up, say goodbye, go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.